Hey guys, this is GunFun ZS here on Untold Weapons. I'm here at the Reloaders Network to show you something very interesting. It's a historical oddity that I doubt any of you have seen before. Gonna try not to be coy or a tease, but I think it's worth discussing sort of the background before I get to the actual item itself. So bear with me and I'll talk through a little bit of history. If you went back into the late 1800s or say up through the 20s, 30s, and 40s, most households kind of lived in the country, and most of them had a multi-purpose rifle, pistol, or shotgun. Quite frequently, it was a cheap single-shot rifle or shotgun, or maybe one of each. And these guns got a lot of use. They could be a personal defense weapon, and they could be for keeping the coyotes and the raccoons out of the chickens, and quite often they were for putting protein on the table. A lot of the time, these weapons were significantly less powerful than what we would consider the bare minimums today. Anyway, you'd find that it wasn't uncommon, if you talk to old people or read their books, for people to be doing things like hunting bear with 22 Swift or other very small cartridges. Among those popular cartridges, a lot of them were designed in the 1800s around lever-action rifles, and a lot of what people had were multi-purpose uniform guns like 12-gauge shotgun. There's a lot that you can do with a 12-gauge shotgun. Another popular were cartridges that could be in a pistol or rifle like 25-20, which is primarily a lever-action cartridge developed by Winchester. This one is 32-20. And by today's standards, these would be considered weak for pistols even. And when it came out, 38 Special with a lead round nose, very low velocity, low pressure cartridge was incredibly popular for hunting and food and a bunch of things. Something that is on par with the intermediate caliber carbines, and at the time was kind of more towards the powerful end of the popular cartridges, was a cartridge known as 30 Winchester Center Fire, and now we know it more as 30-30. What I'm going to show you is something that's a little bit different. Or perhaps I should do an homage to Monty Python and say, and now for something completely different. And I'm going to, again, detour from showing you the actual thing and talk about where it came from. And to another degree, kind of avoid talking about where it came from because the person who gave it to me asked me to. So, in general terms, there is a thing called a safe surrender box at most military establishments. That's basically, if you have weapons or ordnance that you didn't turn in at the right place, dump it there and somebody will make sure it's disposed of safely or correctly returned to inventory, and you won't get in trouble for failing to check it in when you were supposed to. This came from or near one of those. I'm not actually sure what. I know it was several years ago, but not dozens of years ago. So it's entirely possible that this item came from the United States or anywhere else in the world that United States soldiers could have been. And during the time frame when I think it came from, it's highly likely that it came from Iraq or Afghanistan. So now let's look at the actual item. Here you've got 30-30 Winchester. Here you've got some fired rounds of 30-30 Winchester. And here we've got the item. It looks like 30-30 Winchester, but it isn't. But it is. So let's look at what it is. Okay. This item, which I will try to hold steady so you can get a good look on that, is a 30-30 Winchester case, but it's also not. You'll notice that it has a black magnetite oxidized iron center in there that has a noticeable primer divot where it's been struck with a firing pin many times. This is oxidized black of that kind of black oxide that you would not see except for years and years of handling in slow oxide. When I go find World War II era and older iron that's been handled by people a lot, it gets this kind of finish. It isn't rust, it is slow oxide. That tells me that this item is probably 50 or more years old. There's a chamfer here, and try to avoid washing out the camera with reflected light off my pointer here, and there's several notches around the rim. If you look closely here, you'll see the interesting bit. If you compare to a standard 3030 case, and you look down, you can notice it goes much further in. And if you notice the base, you'll see that it has an off-center primer strike, which isn't all that abnormal, as you would expect from most lever-action rifles. And you'll see that it has a standard large rifle primer in the middle. This clearly doesn't have that. And if you look very closely, you will notice that there are some rub marks right there. It's also worth noting that the brass has that sort of bronze finish of brass that's oxidized. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to push. And you'll see, look at that. That is interesting. If I pull this out, you will see something else interesting. What this is very similar to those caliber conversion kits that you often see for 12-gauge shotguns. This is a conversion to allow 30-30 to fire 32 ACP, also known as 7.65 Browning. Try to get that in focus there. Okay. Now, if you'll notice, here's a 30 caliber bullet sized at 309. It fits right in this fired case just fine. It's a little bit snug. But you can see that the diameter there is about the same. Originally, this would have had a round nose, probably lead cartridge, very similar to this. This one is 32 short Colt, which is effectively the same cartridge as 32 ACP, but designed for a revolver. 32 ACP was a automatic equivalent to this cartridge. And I suspect that this cartridge would even fit inside, but I'm not going to force it and make it work. So, I will talk about how this was done, and then we'll look at why this might have been done. And I have my theories. So if you look here, you'll see that this is a bolt that was either probably 3/8/16. I haven't put a thread pitch gauge on there, but I suspect that's what that is. It could have also been a 10mm bolt, but at the time I don't think metric thread pitches were dominant. It has been hand filed. I initially thought maybe they turned it using a drill as a lathe, which is a thing I've done. But noticing that there's flat strokes here that indicate it was filed in this manner to reduce its diameter. There's a file. So I believe they flattened it. They cut a flat down the side, cut a slot with a hacksaw here, and then made this spring. It's possible that the spring was made for some other purpose, but I think this one was custom made for the job. No real way to tell that for sure that I can think of. You'll notice that there is actual rust in this area where it hasn't been subject to handling. Then they filed, and you can see linear scratch marks from file moving like so, and created a firing pin. Try to keep that in frame and focus. So you can see that there's stick out. It's a little bit deep firing pin protrusion. You might wonder how they guarantee adequate case support. So if you look at the fired case, let's try to get that in focus. Hopefully you can see that the dent from the firing pin is quite deep in the primer. But it clearly worked. And the case isn't blown out. There's a little bit of a wasted area here. It was a nice tight fit in the modified 3030 cartridge. And if you look here, you'll find
that there maybe is a little bit of airspace between and behind the shoulder. But if you look at where this case sits in there, almost the entire case that it would actually hold powder or pressure is actually being supported by the neck area of the 30-30 rifle chamber. So this is a very anemic cartridge without a lot of pressure, and all the pressure bearing surfaces are in effect transferred to the bolt face by this steel bolt section and supported directly by the neck portion of the rifle chamber. It's worth commenting that the diameter difference between 32 ACP and 30-30 isn't significant. Might be a little bit tight chambering. Here's 32 Colt. We see that it is 0.313 inches at the widest portion. I believe that's a heeled bullet, as opposed to 309. I would bet you a lot of 30-30s tend to run closer to 312 anyway. If we measure this at the neck, it measures 0.328 after being fired. And if we measure the neck of a fired 30-30 case, we get 0.329. What do you know? If we measure an unfired one, we get 0.326. So there's only 4 thou of blowout. This is actually quite well fitted to the job. Oh, another thing I was going to mention. They put this spring in here, and then they hammered this little tab down. Try to hold that in focus and not make you seasick. Thus pinching that in there. This is all quite cleverly made. Now, I know some of you are thinking, if I had a 30-30, it's almost certainly going to be a nice antique lever-action rifle. I would never trust something janky like this to it. Well, it's very low pressure. This isn't going to hurt the rifle, but it might hurt the firing pin smacking it against steel repeatedly, and they clearly did it enough times to dent this. I noticed that the dent is slightly off-center, as are the other ones, and I don't see multiple dents, so either the firing pin followed into the old hole, or whoever used this carefully indexed the cartridge the same direction every time. I'm not sure which. I kind of suspect that whoever did this was less concerned about the rifle and more concerned about being able to shoot it at all. But I will hold off that conjecture till the next discussion point. So now we see how this was made. Let's talk about why somebody might make this. Well, this could have been done in America just as a simple way to have a cheaper game getter. In the teens, 20s, and 30s, a lot of people were quite poor, and it was very common for people to buy 1 or 2 cartridges at a time at their local hardware or general store. A lot of the times there'd be penny candies and penny cartridges. They'd open up a cartridge box and write 1 cent on the flap, and small pistol cartridges would be around a penny each. It was also common for stores to have things that you would trade in, kind of like kids collect pop cans today and trade them in, or beer cans, for the recycling fee. My grandfather's talked about being paid by farmers or different state agencies bounties on certain kinds of pests. Like they would, if they found tobacco worms, they would put them in a jug of kerosene and bring that into the general store, and they would pay them a cent for every 5 tobacco worms that was in the jug, or something like that. So it was very common for people to single purchase 1 cartridge and be expected to, if you're a kid or teenager, to be sent out to do your chores with a rifle, and you were expected to bring back a rabbit or something for every cartridge you fired. If you were a poor person in the 20s, this could get you more shots. However, I think there's an actual more likely explanation, although that one is possible, and that is, what do you do if you are in a war-torn region and you've managed to get an antique firearm that has essentially no available ammunition in your country? You have this because it was all you could afford. If you were in Iraq or Afghanistan or somewhere in the Middle East, there would be potentially a few rifles, such as I know France used during World War I, 30-30 lever-action rifles from Winchester as rear echelon support rifles. I know the Ottoman Empire also had some of the same thing, and they'd be traded around as lend-lease. Also, there's such a thing as private purchase, although that's less common. And so it's possible that there's old French lend-lease rifles from the French campaign of occupation in the period after World War I of what was Ottoman holdings and the sort of semi-independent regime of King Faisal. Anyway, I don't want to get into all the politics, but for various historical reasons, it's very plausible that there's a few Winchester lever-action 30-30s kicking around the Middle East, but not a available supply of ammunition. However, 32 ACP is very common throughout most of Europe, often labeled 7.65 Browning. You'll notice the head stamp on this, if you can read it, says Remington UMC 32 7.65 millimeters. So I think this is American-made European export, although somebody else may know more about that head stamp. Anyway, if you're the person who is an Iraqi person who needs a general protection rifle and possibly another way of getting protein, and you have a rifle that you can't feed ammunition, it's next to useless. However, if you can convert it to a comparatively common cartridge, you now have a rifle that works. You are willing to accept some damage on the firing pin because now it works. If you are a small production backyard gunsmiths of the style like most U.S. people refer to as a Khyber Pass, but in different parts of the Arabic-speaking world they'd call it a Dara'i type gunsmith, then maybe you get this antique gun and you could, in your shop with files and simple tools, make this conversion thing, and now you have a gun that is substantially easier to sell because there's a way to shoot it. That one strikes me as being very plausible. Somebody clearly used this a fair amount, and somehow this came back. I would point out another advantage of this. Remember how earlier I mentioned that it was very common for people to be using calibers that we would now consider very anemic for bringing down everything from attackers to very large game, as well as small game. One of the perks of a long rifle with a very weak cartridge is if you're not wearing hearing protection, it is a lot quieter. A lot of people now don't appreciate what's nice about a long barrel 22 or 22 short is that without a suppressor and without the now common practice of wearing earplugs, you're not deafening yourself just to get dinner. Anyway, I've probably exhausted my actual knowledge and given you my most plausible speculation. I'd be very interested if any of you have seen anything similar or have any knowledge of this sort of thing, and I'm very open to hearing any reasonable speculation you may have, and I suppose your unreasonable speculation too. Anyway, thanks to Loads of Bacon for allowing me to host this on his channel, and I will probably repost it on mine as well. And this is GunFun out.